What kind of airline kicks too calm, black paying passengers out of first class, before even asking who they really are? The flight hadn't even taken off yet, and already the looks had started. The whispers, the subtle glances at their seats. Then came the first jab, a flight attendant's voice, sweet as poison, asking if they were lost. But Jordan and Maya weren't lost. They were exactly where they were supposed to be. It was everyone else who didn't see it. Not yet. This isn't just a story about a flight. This is about what happens when power meets prejudice, when judgment moves faster than facts, and when the people you dismiss turn out to be the ones you should have never crossed. You're not ready for what's about to unfold. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? What do you think is really going on here? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay locked in, because this story is going somewhere no one on that flight ever expected. The airport bustled with early morning travelers, business people on Bluetooth calls, and families herding sleepy kids toward the gate. In the sea of motion, two teenagers stood out, not because they were loud or lost, but because they moved with a certain poise most didn't expect. Jordan Bennett, 17, walked with his hands in his pockets and earbuds dangling from one ear. His sister Maya, 2 years older, carried herself with a quiet elegance, a tablet tucked under her arm, her travel tote slung neatly on her shoulder. Both wore matching navy tracksuits, tasteful, modest, not flashy, but to some eyes, it screamed coach class. Especially to Veronica Lang, the senior flight attendant watching the first-class line with sharp, hawk-like eyes. From the moment they entered the jet bridge, Veronica noticed them. Her lips barely moved as she whispered to her younger colleague, "They're in the wrong line." Her tone was matter-of-fact, not questioning. She wasn't curious. She was certain. Jordan and Maya approached the aircraft doors as instructed. Their first-class boarding passes were ready. Jordan even greeted the crew cheerfully. "Morning." Maya nodded politely, her eyes meeting Veronica's for the briefest moment. That look, level self-assured, irked Veronica more than she'd admit. Before they could step further into the first-class cabin, Veronica raised a palm like a traffic cop. "Hold on. This area is for first-class passengers only." Her voice was loud enough to make a businessman behind them glance up from his phone. Maya calmly handed over her boarding pass. "We're in 2A and 2B." Veronica squinted at the passes as if they were forged. She said, clearly unconvinced. She scanned them once, then again. The names matched the manifest. The seats matched the layout. But still, something in her voice resisted. "I see. Just stay put for a moment." She turned on her heel and walked briskly into the cabin, leaving the siblings standing like they were awaiting permission. Maya shot Jordan a sideways glance. "Here we go," she murmured under her breath. Jordan tapped his foot, not quite annoyed, but not surprised either. This wasn't new. They'd both grown used to it in hotel lobbies, in fancy restaurants, in VIP lines at concerts. They always had the credentials, but never the look people expected. Veronica returned a minute later, her expression neutral, but her words anything but. "You may proceed, but please refrain from tampering with cabin equipment." Jordan blinked, confused. "Sorry, the espresso unit in the front galley. It's not for guests to touch," she added, her eyes flicking to the sleek stainless steel coffee machine nearby. "There's a button labeled Do Not Use." "I saw your hand near it." "I didn't touch anything," Jordan said, slightly amused. "I was reading the label." "Exactly," Veronica replied coolly. "That machine is not a toy." The moment felt surreal. Jordan wasn't even near the machine. Maya hadn't noticed him move at all. Veronica moved past them, muttering something about protocols. As they reached their seats, second row, window, and aisle, Maya took a deep breath. "That's strike one." Jordan flopped into his seat and reached for the small cloth gift bag in his carry-on. Inside was a box set of colored pencils and a sketchbook, gifts for their little brother, whose birthday they were flying home for. He held it up, examining the packaging. The bag had cartoon animals on it, something a child would love. Veronica reappeared like a bad memory. She stopped abruptly when she spotted the bag and pursed her lips. "I suggest you keep personal items tucked away neatly." This isn't a kindergarten field trip. Her tone was syrupy with contempt. Maya turned toward her, voice still calm. It's a gift. For our brother. We'll stow it when we're done. I'll make a note, Veronica said curtly, before striding off again. Behind them, a man in a crisp suit leaned toward another passenger and said something neither could fully hear, but the words entitled teens floated back to Maya's ears. She ignored it. She'd learned long ago the best way to deal with those comments was to pretend they were beneath notice. But in her chest, something hardened. A few rows up, another flight attendant, a younger woman with a soft smile, approached and began offering water. When she got to Maya, she smiled politely. Would you like a drink before takeoff? Maya nodded. Still water, please. Before the girl could pour, Veronica appeared again, stepping in. That won't be necessary, she said sharply. Cabin service begins at cruising altitude. The young attendant froze. But I said no, Veronica snapped. The girl backed away, flustered. Maya remained silent. Jordan whispered, strike 3. Across the cabin, another passenger watched the entire exchange. An older woman, perhaps in her 70s, clutched her travel scarf and shook her head subtly. She'd seen enough. 10 minutes passed. Other passengers boarded, but the hostility lingered in the air like a bad smell. Maya pulled out her tablet and pretended to read. Jordan leaned back and put his hoodie over his head. Veronica passed by once more, this time not saying a word, but her eyes lingered on them like she was just waiting for a reason to pounce. The aircraft doors had closed, and the pre-flight bustle began to settle into a quiet murmur as the plane prepared for taxi. First-class passengers shifted into comfortable positions, flight attendants began their final checks, and the air buzzed with polite small talk and the occasional clink of glassware. Amid it all, Jordan and Maya sat in awkward silence, still absorbing the residue of Veronica's passive-aggressive greeting. Jordan adjusted his hoodie and sank deeper into his seat, while Maya, postured perfectly upright, stared straight ahead, pretending to scroll through her tablet, though her mind was far from a screen. From the front galley, Veronica's voice echoed through the cabin, cutting through the ambient noise with sharp precision. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 374 with non-stop service to Los Angeles, she began, her tone deceptively warm. We'd like to remind passengers in the premium cabin that this space is reserved for those seeking a tranquil, exclusive experience. Kindly refrain from disrupting the environment with inappropriate behavior, loud chatter, or unnecessary movement. Thank you for respecting the sanctity of our first-class cabin. Her words, though generalized, hung in the air like a coded attack. A few passengers instinctively turned their heads toward Jordan and Maya, curiosity dancing in their eyes. One man too rose up, even adjusted in his seat to get a better look. Maya didn't flinch, but Jordan exhaled heavily and muttered, "You hear that? That's the shut up, you don't belong here announcement." Maya's lips barely moved. Don't give her what she wants. But Veronica wasn't done. She stepped behind the service curtain, pulled out her phone, and within seconds began recording a quick Instagram story. Framed perfectly in the background was the cabin, the polished leather seats, and the edges of Jordan and Maya's row just barely visible. Flying first today, she narrated quietly, but it's not like it used to be. Standards have really changed. You never know who you'll find up here these days. She added a smug smirk before ending the video. With a few swipes, it was up, captioned, "When they start handing out first class like raffle prizes." It was vague enough to dodge direct accusations, but her audience, full of coworkers and frequent flyers, would get the message. Veronica felt a twinge of satisfaction as the first likes rolled in. She had spoken her truth, veiled as it was. Back in the cabin, Maya's tablet pinged. She glanced at it and froze. A friend had seen the story. It had already been reposted to a private industry group Maya occasionally browsed. The angle was unmistakable. Her stomach tightened, but she said nothing. She tapped her screen, saved the clip, and quietly sent it to her father. Jordan noticed her stillness. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. "She filmed us. It's online already," Maya replied without looking up. Jordan's jaw clenched. "That's harassment. It's documentation now," Maya said. Don't worry, we'll use it. Meanwhile, Veronica resumed her duties as if nothing had happened. She served orange juice to the row behind them, then returned to Maya and Jordan with nothing but cold water and a tight-lipped smile. "We're out of sparkling," she lied. "Perhaps next time, book earlier." Her words were barbed, but she delivered them with a performance-level cheerfulness. Maya accepted the glass wordlessly. The businessman across the aisle, who had noticed the earlier coffee machine incident, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Yet, he wasn't sure what he was seeing, but he knew it wasn't standard hospitality. Veronica continued down the aisle, her posture proud, her control intact. She had claimed the cabin like a queen defending her throne from undeserving subjects. Every passive-aggressive jab, every micro-moment of condescension, was carefully curated, deliberate, and designed to undermine without leaving fingerprints. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Maya was documenting every step. She had opened the camera on her tablet, subtly tilted it to capture Veronica as she moved, her voice, her actions, the patterns. Jordan, too, had begun to quietly jot notes into his phone. Timestamps, statements, all of it. They were no longer reacting, they were collecting. As the flight prepared for takeoff, the overhead lights dimmed slightly. Jordan leaned toward Maya. "You think she knows who we are?" Her fingers hovered for a moment, then danced across the screen, selecting seat assignments. Just beneath Jordan and Maya's names was an option that read Reassign, Cabin Conflict. With 3 taps, she shifted them from row 2 to row 10, still technically within the premium cabin, but right next to the lavatory, where traffic was constant and comfort non-existent. She didn't announce it immediately. She wanted the sting to land mid-service. Across the aisle, Jordan and Maya remained composed, though the growing discomfort was tangible. Passengers had stopped whispering, but the stares hadn't stopped. Maya knew Veronica's story had spread, and now they weren't just out of place, they were being watched like intruders. That's when Veronica made her next move. She approached their row with another crew member, a younger technician in a gray uniform with a maintenance tablet in hand. He looked hesitant, uncertain, glancing at Maya and Jordan with an apologetic wince. "Good afternoon," Veronica said, voice falsely bright. "This is Ron from Ground Operations. We've had a data sync issue with our manifest, and unfortunately, we need to verify a few details on your booking." Maya narrowed her eyes. "Is there a problem with our tickets?" "Not necessarily," Veronica replied with a shrug, "but our system flagged your names during takeoff. It's probably nothing, but we're required to check." The technician didn't meet their eyes. "May I scan your boarding passes again?" Jordan, jaw clenched, handed his phone over. Maya followed. The technician scanned them with a portable reader, and sure enough, the screen lit up green. Valid, verified, paid in full. He turned to Veronica. "Everything checks out." Veronica, not missing a beat, forced a smile. "Then it must have been a glitch. Though, strangely enough, it's showing you both assigned to different seats now. That's odd." She pretended to scroll. "Yes, here it is. Row 10, seat C and D. I'm afraid the system must have reassigned you automatically." "Automatically?" Maya repeated slowly. "During the flight?" Veronica nodded solemnly. "It happens occasionally when there's a discrepancy in status codes. You're still in the premium cabin, of course, just a few rows back." Jordan leaned forward. "We were here first. Our names were on 2A and 2B. You checked them." "Yes, but the manifest overrides are controlled by operations," Veronica lied effortlessly. "We don't always know when the change is happening." Maya turned to the technician. "Did you see any override code on your scan?" The technician hesitated. "No, ma'am, but that data might not always show up on my end." Veronica cut in before Maya could press. "If you'd please relocate, we'll help you get settled right away." The air around them grew tense. A businessman in 3C frowned. The older woman in 1A, who had overheard Veronica's previous snide comments, put down her crossword and watched silently. Maya stood slowly. "Let me get this straight. Our seats were valid. Your scan confirmed that. But now you're saying the system moved us mid-air for no reason." Veronica smiled tighter. Exactly. No reason at all. Just a glitch. Jordan stood too, but his movements were sharp, not rushed. "We're not fools," he said quietly. "You're doing this on purpose." Veronica blinked, taken aback by his directness. "Sir, that's a serious accusation." "So is racial targeting," Maya added. Veronica's smile vanished. "That's not what this is." "Then tell us what it is," Jordan pressed. Veronica glanced around, saw too many eyes on her, and motioned quickly. "Let's continue this conversation in the galley. We don't want to disturb the other guests." "You already did," Maya said, her voice low but cutting. They walked down the aisle with Veronica, past rows of silent onlookers, past faces that ranged from curious to complicit. When they reached row 10, the seats were empty, but one tray table was broken, and the area reeked faintly of chemical cleanser from the nearby lavatory. Veronica gestured. "Please." Jordan and Maya stood still. "You want us to sit in the dirtiest, most disruptive row in the cabin, after we paid for front row seats?" "Like I said," Veronica snapped, "you're still in the premium section." "Premium in name only," Maya replied. Jordan didn't sit. He looked her in the eye. "Start recording," he said. Maya, without flinching, opened her camera. Veronica stepped back, suddenly aware of the small red light blinking in the corner. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Protecting our rights," Jordan replied. "If this is just a glitch, you won't mind it being documented." Veronica stared at them, her expression hardening. "You're being difficult." "No," Maya said, voice calm as stone, "we're being watched." "And now? So are you." Veronica returned to the galley with clipped strides, her polished heels striking the floor like punctuation marks. In the crew space, she exhaled hard and muttered under her breath, "They think they're clever." She opened the crew manifest again and toggled the service flags for row 10, deactivated beverage service, removed extra comfort items, and unchecked the meal preference request. The system wouldn't flag it. No one would notice unless they were looking. And no one would look. Not for them. Back in row 10, Maya closed her tablet and leaned back, exhaustion washing over her. Jordan sat beside her, his arms crossed, foot bouncing slightly in agitation. The roar of the engines was a steady rhythm, but it did nothing to mask the tension simmering around them. An hour passed. Trays of sparkling water and wine moved through the cabin. Warm towels were handed to nearly every passenger, except them. Jordan pressed the call button once. Nothing. 10 minutes passed. Maya pressed it again. Still nothing. Veronica passed by their row twice, each time refusing to make eye contact, gliding past as if the seats were empty. When a junior attendant named Ellie stopped near them to adjust a bin, Jordan seized the moment. "Excuse me, could we get some water?" he asked politely. Ellie blinked, startled. "Of course, I'll check right away." But before she could turn, Veronica appeared behind her like a shadow. "They're fine," she said sharply. "I've already checked on them." Ellie hesitated. "But they asked for water, and they'll get it after turbulence clears," Veronica said, gesturing vaguely at the cabin, though the flight was perfectly smooth. Ellie looked confused, but obeyed, moving on. Maya sat in silence, her fingers locked tightly in her lap. Jordan muttered, "This is psychological warfare." Maya nodded once. "She's making us disappear." But Veronica wasn't satisfied with silence. She wanted them alienated. On her next pass through the forward cabin, she leaned down to a passenger in 8C, an older man in a pinstripe suit who had glanced curiously at the earlier commotion. Her voice was quiet, but laced with implication. "Just letting you know, those two in 10D and E, we've had some issues on previous flights. Nothing confirmed, but keep an eye on your things, just in case." The man raised an eyebrow. "Issues. Disruptive behavior. Refusal to follow instructions," she said, voice hushed, expertly feigning concern. Some crews even flagged them in the internal log. The man didn't question her. He simply nodded, adjusted his bag beneath the seat, and kept watching. Veronica repeated the tactic with a middle-aged woman 3 rows back, then again with a solo traveler near the emergency exit. By the end of her round, she'd planted enough unease to ensure no one would offer Jordan or Maya so much as a napkin. The result was immediate. When Maya reached for the shared armrest beside her and accidentally grazed the elbow of the man next to her, he flinched slightly and pulled away, clutching his phone. Another passenger, passing by on the way to the restroom, looked down at them with something between suspicion and pity. They were no longer fellow travelers. They were anomalies. The environment was weaponized now. Every glance was colder, every pause heavier. Jordan tapped Maya's arm. "They're afraid of us now." Maya whispered, "No, they're afraid of what she told them." Which makes it worse. Veronica lingered near the front, checking her tablet again, her expression satisfied. She had control, undisputed, unchallenged. Her colleagues followed her lead, whether knowingly or by default. Even the newer crew had started avoiding their row. One whispered to another, "What did they do?" "The response," asked Veronica. And Veronica never gave full answers. Only seeds. Seeds that were now growing into something uglier. As Maya folded her arms and turned to the window, she saw their reflection in the dim glass. Two figures seated beside the lavatory, beneath the hum of overhead lights, completely isolated in a cabin designed to reward presence. They had been erased without being removed. That, she realized, was Veronica's game. Not confrontation, domination. And Maya had had enough. She picked up her tablet again, not to record, but to write. Her father's email. Short, simple, to the point. Subject: In-flight misconduct, Flight 374. Attachments: Video 1, Video 2. Message: We've been reassigned, denied service, and publicly targeted. It's not just one person anymore. They're being led. Jordan saw what she was doing and smiled faintly. "You think he'll respond in time?" Maya looked at him calmly. "He doesn't need to respond." Her tone was razor sharp now. He just needs to see it. Their call buttons remained unanswered. But worse than the exclusion was the new layer Veronica introduced, the attack on their very identity. She didn't stop at isolating them. She wanted to make them feel ridiculous for daring to believe they ever belonged. From the front galley, she leaned casually against the crew console, sipping coffee, speaking in low tones with a male flight attendant named Grant, a recent transfer who still carried the eagerness of someone trying too hard to fit in. Veronica smirked and pointed subtly back toward row 10. "See them," she said, her voice soft but biting. "There may be, 17? 18 at best. Kids like that don't fly first class unless their parents made a mistake on the booking." Grant looked back briefly. They seemed pretty confident. Veronica snorted. TikTok confidence. You give them one scholarship and they think they're Jeff Bezos. She chuckled quietly, then leaned closer. "I've worked this route for 12 years. I know real premium passengers. They don't wear sneakers and carry cartoon gift bags." She sipped her coffee again, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Honestly, if I were their mother, I'd be embarrassed." Grant laughed, unsure if he should, but he followed her lead. From their seats, Jordan couldn't hear the conversation, but he didn't need to. He saw the glances, the laughter, the way Veronica pointed with her eyes, then whispered behind a cup of coffee. Maya noticed it too. "She's making it personal now," Maya murmured. "This is beyond protocol." Jordan's voice dropped. "She doesn't see people. She sees problems to erase." At that moment, a light chime rang through the cabin. Veronica stepped forward again, this time holding the crew microphone, her expression composed, but her posture oozing contempt masked as professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear over the PA, "we'd like to remind all passengers in our premium section that this area is reserved for adult travelers seeking a refined, mature flying experience. Minors, if unaccompanied, must refrain from engaging in disruptive behavior or attempting to access amenities not included with their status." The words hit like a slap. They were coded just enough to sound official, but they carried an unmistakable sting. The entire first-class section turned, subtly but noticeably, toward row 10. A businessman smirked. A woman lowered her champagne glass, eyebrow raised. The couple across the aisle whispered. Maya sat still, face expressionless, though her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Jordan leaned back slowly, eyes closed for a moment, breathing through the humiliation. "She just told the whole cabin we're fake," he said quietly. Maya nodded. "And childish." A few seconds later, Veronica walked down the aisle with a tray of drinks for another row. As she passed Jordan, she paused, leaned slightly, and spoke just loud enough for him to hear. "First class doesn't come with free babysitting, you know." Jordan didn't react. He just turned his head slightly and looked at her, not angry, not shocked, just cold. "You think this is funny?" he asked. "I think reality is refreshing," she replied. "You're just not used to hearing it." Maya reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved quickly as she opened a document she'd prepared long ago but never thought she'd need. Escalation Protocol Passenger Misconduct Internal. She'd worked on it with her father 2 summers ago during an internship. It was never meant for public eyes, but it had teeth. Jordan leaned toward her. "What is that?" She glanced up. "A kill switch." Veronica continued down the aisle, smirking, unaware. She felt victorious. No yelling, no resistance. They were quiet. To her, silence meant surrender. She didn't realize she'd pushed them past the point of reaction and into the realm of consequence. Maya finished typing, then sent the document to one address, her father's direct company line, with the subject, "Ongoing in-flight harassment live." She attached audio from the PA announcement, timestamp call button logs, and screenshots of a crew manifest edit trail that Jordan had quietly photographed earlier. "What now?" Jordan asked. Maya looked out the window. "Now we wait for the sky to shake." Maya's message had been sent, her attachments confirmed delivered, but there was no reply yet. She knew it would take time. She also knew what was coming next. Veronica had never once backed off. She was accelerating, and she wanted blood. Jordan tapped his fingers on the armrest, his jaw tight, eyes forward. He wasn't scared. He was furious. Then it came. The next strike. Veronica returned to the cabin with her microphone again in hand, her voice echoing through the aircraft in that same saccharine smooth tone she used to disguise poison. "At this time, we'd like to confirm onboard status for passengers in rows 10 and 11. Would passengers Johnson Baby and Maria Benet please step forward to the galley for verification?" The cabin fell still. Maya's breath caught. Jordan's eyes narrowed. "Did she just—" "Yes," Maya said flatly. "She did." Veronica stood there with the mic lowered, eyes straight ahead like nothing was wrong. "Passenger Johnson Baby," she repeated, this time louder, as if daring anyone to object. A quiet chuckle came from a row behind them. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." Jordan stood. "It's Jordan Bennett," he said loudly, stepping into the aisle. "And her name is Maya Bennett. Not Maria. Not Baby. Bennett." Veronica turned toward him with faux surprise. "Oh, apologies. Must have been a system error." She didn't blink, didn't smile, just stared. Maya rose beside her brother, steady and unflinching. "You're not even pretending anymore," she said. Veronica tilted her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do," Maya said calmly. "And so does everyone in this cabin." But Veronica wasn't finished. She leaned slightly to the side, speaking into her shoulder radio with a kind of casual command that came from knowing no one was watching closely enough to stop her. "Flight 374 requesting San Francisco Airport Gate Security on standby. We've got a cabin disturbance. 2 minors exhibiting noncompliance. Possible forged manifest entries. We'll need assistance at arrival." Maya blinked once. "She's trying to get us flagged." Jordan's voice was low. "She's trying to get us dragged." Passengers shifted. A woman 3 rows up glanced over, startled. The man in 8C, one of the first Veronica had whispered to, now looked unsure. There was nothing about Jordan or Maya that seemed aggressive. They weren't raising voices. They weren't violating any rules. And yet, a uniformed woman had just called them a security risk over a quiet correction of their own names. Veronica turned back toward them and smiled tightly. "Please return to your seats," she said, the edge in her voice now fully exposed. "You've already made enough of a scene." "You made the scene," Maya replied. "We just happened to be in it." "I'll ask again," Return to your seats, Veronica repeated louder, or this becomes a federal matter. You already made it one, Jordan said. He sat back down, slowly, deliberately. Maya followed, but her fingers moved again, this time on her tablet, opening the airline's internal personnel directory. One of the perks of having grown up around the business. She still had credentials from a training system internship. From the back of the cabin, a younger flight attendant named Ellie approached hesitantly. She knelt beside Maya's seat and whispered, "I'm sorry, but..." She told us not to assist you. We didn't know it had gone this far. Maya met her eyes. Thank you. That's all I needed to hear. Veronica turned. Ellie, please return to station, she ordered sharply. Now. Ellie backed away, visibly shaken. Maya sent one more message, this time flagged urgent, to the airline security operations division, time-stamped with Veronica's false report. Then she hit forward to legal. She turned to Jordan. Now we don't just have harassment. We have falsified protocol, impersonation of passenger data, and abuse of federal compliance reporting. Jordan nodded slowly. Let her keep talking. Every word's another nail. At the front, Veronica spoke into the mic one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for your cooperation. All cabin incidents are being handled, and we expect a smooth remainder of the flight. Upon arrival, local security will assist with disembarkation for affected individuals. She said affected like it was code for dangerous, like it was a verdict. But she didn't know what was waiting at the gate. She didn't know the man who was already watching this flight's manifest from a command terminal in Chicago, who had just read Maya's forwarded message and ordered a full audit. Veronica stood in the aisle, her arms crossed like a judge presiding over a courtroom, her eyes cold and devoid of empathy. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet enough to feign professionalism, but loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. Per FAA policy, any passengers involved in repeated disturbances are required to sign a passenger incident report before disembarkation. Refusal to sign may result in further intervention. She pulled out a printed form from her folio, a generic disciplinary report used for genuine safety violations, and extended it toward Jordan, along with a pen. He looked at the paper, then at her, expression unreadable. "This is blank," he said. "There's no case ID, no timestamp, no written violation." "Standard procedure," she replied coolly. "Just a formality. It states you were involved in a mid-cabin incident, refused seat reassignment, and disrupted passenger comfort." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Is that the official narrative now?" Veronica didn't blink. "It will be if you don't cooperate." Jordan stared at her, the pen still untouched in his hand. "And if I do sign it? Then it gets filed and forgotten," Veronica said, as if offering a favor. "No marks, no blacklists, just a note in the system that you were non-compliant." "Minor. And completely false," Maya added. "But convenient for you." Veronica's lips twitched. "For all of us, actually. Unless you'd prefer airport security to make that decision." Jordan didn't move. Maya leaned forward. "You're bluffing." Veronica leaned in closer. "I don't need to bluff. The paperwork is ready. The radio is active. Your choice." A quiet cough broke the tension. From across the aisle, the elderly woman in seat 1A, the one who'd been silently watching since boarding, stood up, gripping the headrest for support. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I've been listening, and I think what's happening here is wrong." Veronica turned sharply. "Ma'am, please remain seated." "I will," the woman replied, "once you answer why these two children are being targeted while they've done nothing disruptive." "This doesn't concern you," Veronica snapped. "On the contrary," the woman said, "injustice concerns all of us." A few murmurs stirred in nearby rows. Another passenger, 8C, lowered his headphones and looked up. Veronica's smile vanished. "You are not authorized to speak on behalf of other passengers," she said, voice tightening. "If you continue, I'll be forced to document your interference." "Go ahead," the woman replied, "and I'll document yours." Veronica froze. For a moment, just one, her confidence flickered. But she recovered quickly. "Sir," she said, addressing Jordan, ignoring the woman entirely now, "please sign the document." Jordan placed the pen down on the tray table. No, Veronica's jaw locked. "Then you'll be escorted off the aircraft upon landing." "Good," Maya said. "At least then someone else will have to see this farce." Veronica turned on her heel and walked briskly back toward the galley, muttering into her shoulder mic. 10 Alpha 2, prepare for intervention on arrival. Notify Gate 5 to clear security entry. She didn't care who was watching anymore. She didn't care that her actions had escalated into a spectacle. In her mind, she was winning. She had silenced them, shamed them, and now she would have them removed, all under the guise of official protocol. Back in their row, Maya reached for her tablet again. "Is it time?" Jordan asked. Maya nodded slowly. Time to let the system watch itself. She opened the airline's internal compliance app and uploaded every document she had gathered. Every time-stamped insult, every bypass service log, the manipulated seat assignments, the falsified report. The digital trail was airtight, and Maya knew exactly which department monitored this channel. Internal Operations Oversight, Level 1. The kind of team that didn't wait for public scandal. They moved before it could reach headlines. Meanwhile, Veronica returned to the front of the cabin and addressed the entire row with performative concern. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience earlier. All issues have been documented and will be resolved at the gate. Thank you for your patience and cooperation." She smiled, satisfied. Around her, passengers nodded half-heartedly. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared at their screens, pretending not to care. She interpreted their silence as approval. She had asserted control and re-established the hierarchy she believed in. She was the authority, the gatekeeper, the filter for who deserved privilege and who didn't. But what she didn't realize was that her words were already being reviewed, that her every action had triggered a compliance audit. Veronica returned to the galley with a breath of satisfaction, already planning how she'd write the post-flight report to secure her narrative before anyone had a chance to dispute it. She imagined herself seated at her favorite cafe, typing out a neat, official-sounding summary about 2 belligerent minors, a disturbance handled with protocol, and how she maintained cabin safety under pressure. That's what she'd done her whole career: curate facts, polish them, and present her version of the truth as gospel. But just as she reached to open the coffee drawer, she heard it. One sentence. Clear, calm, spoken not loudly, but with chilling precision. Jordan's voice traveled down the aisle like a trigger being pulled. "You should really check who signed off your crew evaluation this quarter." Veronica froze. Her hand stopped mid-reach. Her smile faltered. She turned slightly toward row 10, but didn't reply. She didn't have to, because in that moment, her tablet vibrated. Not once. Not a random message. A persistent buzz that only came from one type of notification, the kind that bypassed standard crew alerts. She pulled it out of her pocket and stared. The screen lit up with a crimson banner across the top. Live oversight review in progress, Flight 374 compliance, observer on board. Her throat went dry. She tapped the alert, fingers suddenly clumsy. The interface expanded, displaying the internal dashboard used only by the top ranks in airline operations. A gold seal blinked in the top corner. Authorized Internal Monitor, V. Bennett. Veronica blinked. For the first time since the flight began, her authority didn't feel untouchable. Her hand trembled slightly as she scrolled. Passenger 10, AJ. Bennett. Passenger 10B, M. Bennett. Status, cleared. Verified. Full access. Crew watch status, active. She suddenly felt like the walls of the aircraft were shrinking, like the oxygen had thinned. She turned, scanned the cabin. Jordan was watching her, one brow raised, no hostility in his eyes, only calm, measured silence. Maya sat beside him, her tablet in her lap, glowing faintly with the same interface Veronica now stared at in horror. "No," Veronica whispered, barely audible. She had spent the last 2 hours belittling, targeting, isolating. And now the 2 kids in row 10 weren't just passengers. They were instruments of oversight. And she had just documented her own misconduct in excruciating detail. Her headset crackled to life, and a voice from the flight deck came through. "Veronica, we're receiving a Level 1 review ping from corporate. Did you initiate any internal flight reports?" Her mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. "Yes," she finally said. "But it was minor. Then why is the airline owner's name attached to the review?" Silence. Jordan stood slowly and stepped into the aisle once more, this time without hesitation. He held up a lanyard that had been tucked into his jacket the entire flight. A silver badge gleamed beneath the plastic. Executive Access Operations Audit Division. A few passengers gasped. Maya remained seated, eyes forward. She didn't need to move. The message had been delivered. Jordan spoke again, clearly, for the entire front cabin to hear. "This flight is under live review. All crew conduct, guest treatment, and procedural logs are being forwarded in real time to corporate standards. That includes voice data, seat assignments, and onboard service inconsistencies." He paused. "Including the fake incident report you tried to make us sign." The older woman in 1A nodded slowly, her expression now vindicated. The man in 8C muttered, "I knew something was off." Even Grant, the young flight attendant who'd laughed with Veronica earlier, backed away from the galley entrance and lowered his head. Veronica couldn't breathe. Her fingers tightened around the tablet, as though gripping it might reverse the signal. But nothing was stopping the audit now. Jordan turned to Maya and said quietly, "Send the final flag." Maya tapped once. Across the system, a new line appeared on Veronica's screen. "Escalation confirmed, command office alerted immediate action upon landing." Her breath hitched. She had just lost the game she didn't even know she was playing. All the smirks, the snide remarks, the deliberate cruelty. They weren't invisible. They were recorded, reviewed, and already judged by someone far above her pay grade. Veronica turned to face Jordan fully, her voice hollow now. Why didn't you say something earlier?" Jordan tilted his head slightly. "Why would we?" he said simply. "We wanted to see how far you'd go." The power she had wielded with such smug confidence now flickered like a dying flame. But the humiliation wasn't finished. A faint chime echoed from the cockpit intercom, followed by the calm voice of the captain breaking through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been informed of an active oversight review in progress for Flight 374. Please remain seated as we conduct procedural confirmation. First-class passengers, remain alert for updates regarding onboard compliance review. Thank you for your cooperation." His voice was smooth but strained, the kind of tone that said even he was uncertain who exactly was on his aircraft and what it meant for his crew. Veronica's lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. She looked again at the name on her tablet, V. Bennett. Her chest tightened. It couldn't be. It couldn't be that Bennett. But it was. Less than 10 minutes later, just as the aircraft began its slow descent towards San Francisco International Airport, another chime rang through the cabin. But this time, the door to the cockpit opened, and the captain himself stepped out. He was a tall, composed man in his late 50s with streaks of gray at his temples and the unmistakable bearing of a man used to command. But right now, even his steps were cautious. He walked down the aisle, stopping at row 10. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice quieter now. Jordan stood. Maya followed. "Yes, Captain," Jordan replied, respectfully. "We've confirmed the system registered my flag and the follow-up transmission. I trust it reached the operations terminal." "It did," the captain said, nodding tightly. "We received confirmation from the compliance division." He turned slightly, eyes locking on Veronica. "And we've been instructed to delay cabin disembarkation until a senior representative arrives." Veronica looked like she had swallowed a stone. "A representative?" she asked. The captain nodded once. "From the executive office." As the plane touched down and began its slow taxi toward the gate, the entire cabin buzzed with tension. Passengers leaned into aisles. Crew members exchanged confused glances. Veronica stood stiff, every breath shallow. Then came the final blow. As the aircraft door hissed open and the bridge was connected, A man in a deep navy suit boarded, not through the standard gate, but from the tarmac's executive access ramp. He wore no badge. He needed none. His presence was enough. Victor Bennett walked into the cabin with the calm force of a man who built everything this airline stood for. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes scanned the cabin once and landed directly on Veronica. She paled instantly. Her knees almost buckled. "Mr. Bennett," she stammered. I didn't realize." "No," Victor said, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "You didn't." He looked to the captain. "Lock the crew manifest. No edits, no deletions. I want every action reviewed, every word recorded from the moment boarding began." The captain nodded. "Already initiated, sir." Victor turned back to Veronica. "Do you know who they are?" he asked, motioning to Jordan and Maya. Veronica's throat bobbed. "I assumed they were minors," Victor said, his voice now louder, drawing the attention of every passenger. "Disruptive? System errors? You mean my son and daughter, both of whom were placed under internal watch to evaluate how staff treat our future clientele." A hush fell over the entire cabin. Even those who had rolled their eyes earlier now sat upright, stunned. "This wasn't just a bad decision," Victor continued. "This was a textbook case of prejudice wrapped in arrogance. You used your position not to serve, but to control, to punish, to humiliate." Veronica's mouth trembled. "I didn't know, you didn't care to know," Victor snapped. "And that's worse." He turned toward Jordan and Maya. "You both handled this with more grace than most adults would, and I thank you for documenting what too often goes unseen." Jordan gave a nod. Maya offered a quiet smile. Veronica opened her mouth once more, but Victor silenced her with a single gesture. "You will be escorted off this aircraft. Effective immediately. You are relieved of duty, pending a full disciplinary hearing. Your access is revoked. Your record frozen for audit." The younger attendant, Ellie, stood off to the side, watching with wide eyes. Victor glanced at her. "And to those who stayed silent or helped escalate, your part won't be ignored." But then he looked at Ellie again. "Except you. I saw what you tried to do." Ellie blinked. "I'm sorry I didn't do more." "Next time," Victor said gently, "you will." As security personnel stepped onto the aircraft and Veronica was led away, head bowed, Jordan sat back down slowly. As Veronica disappeared down the aisle flanked by security, her steps uneven and slow, the remaining passengers watched in a rare collective stillness, the kind reserved for witnessing something final. The aircraft no longer buzzed with idle whispers or private speculation. It now breathed truth, raw, sobering, undeniable. Victor Bennett remained standing at the front, his presence grounded in something deeper than authority. Legacy, clarity, and the quiet pain of knowing this wasn't an isolated event. It was just the one that got caught. He took a breath, not out of exhaustion, but from the weight of what came next. Then he turned to face the passengers. "What happened today is not just about one flight," he began, his voice carrying without strain. "It's about a culture that we, for far too long, allowed to grow in the shadows of our brand. A culture where power is mistaken for superiority, where uniforms become shields for judgment instead of service. That ends today." He pulled out a slim digital folder from the inside of his blazer and tapped it once. "Effective immediately, I am launching a mandatory recertification for all cabin staff, starting with long-tenured employees. Each one will undergo equity-focused retraining, passenger rights seminars, and quarterly shadow flights under direct oversight, some of which will be anonymous." There were murmurs in the cabin now, not of gossip, but approval. He continued, "The passenger incident report system will be redesigned, requiring third-party verification before it's filed. If a crew member attempts to forge or coerce a document, as was done today, they will be suspended without appeal pending investigation." His tone was not vengeful, it was surgical. "And for passengers," he added, "who feel silenced, profiled, or dismissed, a new channel will open this week, directly connected to my office. Not PR, not automated replies. Me." He turned back toward Jordan and Maya. Because no one should have to announce who they are to deserve dignity. Maya nodded, the emotion flickering across her face, but never breaking her composure. Jordan simply said, "Thank you, sir." "No," Victor replied, stepping forward. "Thank you. You reminded us that the cost of silence is always paid by those who are treated the worst." Then he turned to the captain. "Resume passenger disembarkation. We'll hold a full debrief with your team at HQ within the hour." The captain nodded with crisp understanding and returned to the cockpit. The door hissed shut. Moments later, the seatbelt sign chimed off, and the flow of passengers resumed. But everything had changed. No one looked at Jordan and Maya the same. Not because they were famous or powerful, but because they had stood still while being diminished and never stooped to match their oppressor's cruelty. The older woman in a stopped beside Maya on her way out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did more than just defend yourselves," she said softly. "You gave the rest of us permission to stop pretending we don't see it." Maya smiled, and the woman continued her walk. The businessman from 8C paused too, nodding at Jordan. "If you ever want to consult on training for corporate ethics, call me," he said, slipping a card discreetly onto Jordan's tray. That kind of composure doesn't come from a textbook. Slowly, the cabin emptied. Only crew remained now, along with Victor, Jordan, and Maya. Grant, the young attendant, approached and looked at Maya. "I'm sorry," he said honestly. "I should have known better." "Then know better next time," Maya replied, not cruelly, but firmly. "And speak up before someone else has to bleed first." Grant nodded and stepped away. Victor placed a hand gently on both his children's shoulders. "You didn't just pass the review," he said, smiling faintly. "You led it." They exited last, walking side by side into the sunlight spilling onto the tarmac, past the stunned silence of gate agents, past cameras they didn't acknowledge, and into a future that would now remember this flight not as a scandal, but as a reckoning. Somewhere in a corporate training center, the footage of Veronica's dismissal would be added to a module titled "Power Misused," when privilege becomes prejudice. It would be paused, replayed, discussed, and dissected by thousands. And Maya's quiet voice in one clip would close that lesson. You don't have to yell to be dangerous. Sometimes, all you have to do is think you're above accountability. The end. If you found this story powerful or thought-provoking, make sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. We've got more stories that challenge injustice and reveal the truth behind the surface. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it Veronica's downfall, the calm strength of Maya and Jordan, or the unexpected reveal of who they really were? And where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts and location in the comments. We'd love to hear your take on this.